that year, and the year happens to be 2021. All that year, we were body surfing a wave of public venom, attempting to swim. It was terrific, thrilling. Hate sprayed us on the left and on the right. We wondered, would it smash us into a reef? On screen, our swaggering leader, man we elected, loosed lies from his lips like eels. It was a good moment for cartoonists and journalists and billionaires and lovers of guns. A good moment for poets. Poets thrive on disaster, born as we are within the wound.
I'm host Alex M. Frankel, a writer from the quiet poetic hinterlands near El Sereno and Highland Park in the beautiful northeast corner of LA. Today, I'll be talking with poet Alicia Ostriker about her latest book, The Holy and Broken Bliss. Alicia Ostriker has published 19 collections of poetry, been twice nominated for the National Book Award, and has twice received the National Jewish Book Award for Poetry, among other honors. Her work has appeared in the New Yorker, the Yale Review, American Poetry Review, Best American Poetry, as well as other journals, and has been translated into numerous languages, including Hebrew and Arabic. Her most recent collections of poems are Waiting for the Light and The Volcano and After. She was New York State Poet Laureate for 2018 to 2021 and a Chancellor at the Academy of American Poets between 2015 and 2020. She lives with her husband in New York City. Welcome, Alicia.
Hi, nice to be here. Lovely to be talking to you, Alex.
Lovely to be talking to you. Now, that poem that you have just read is from your new book, The Holy and Broken Bliss, which I believe is your 19th book, and I've just been reading in the last couple of weeks. It covers the period of the pandemic, as well as many other things going on in the world and in your own life. So I'm excited to talk about that. I'd like to talk about one vital question that is vital for poets anyway. I was at the doctor the other day. I had one of your books with me, and I was reading it as she came in, and she asked me what I was reading. And I said, it's your book of poetry. Her first reaction is, oh, interesting. She was going to read a book in her doctor's book study group, and it was a poetry book, and she was really worried because she didn't usually understand poetry. Obviously, she's a smart person. She is a doctor. What do you say to someone like that who obviously is very bright, but who has this little allergy, this little preconception?
This little allergy to poetry. Poetry allergy. Well, I have many times been in that same situation in which people feel taken aback when they learn that the person that they're talking to is a poet, and they'll say either, I don't understand poetry, embarrassedly, or they'll say, I don't like poetry. And I have developed my sense of the reasons for this. And I can think of 3 reasons why people say, I don't understand poetry, or I'm not a poetry reader, I don't like poetry. And one is kind of simple-minded, that when kids are small, before they start school, they love poetry. You read poetry to kids and they eat it up. Once they start school, they get to read stories, they get narratives, they get fiction, and they don't get poetry. So by the time they are in junior high school and someone out of the blue asks them to read Hamlet, they don't know how to deal with it because they haven't all along been given poems to read that are suitable for their age. So naturally, they think, I don't understand this and I hate it. So that's one thing, one cause. I think a second cause, and this is talked about by the poet Mira Rukeyser in her book, The Life of Poetry, which is very meditative. And she thinks the problem is that poetry reaches into people's feelings too intensely, too strongly. They're afraid of poetry because it's too emotionally overpowering, and they can't deal with it, with the intensity of the emotion. A third reason, I think, is that modern poetry is often written in order to be incomprehensible.
Yes.
The best poetry should be difficult, which I think is nonsense. But those are three reasons why people can say, I don't understand poetry.
Yes. Yes, I think that's very true. I think that is, in fact, a quote by T.S. Eliot. I think he actually did say, referring to the early or middle century, poets need to be difficult, need to be complex. He actually did say it in one of his writings, I think, but I can't refer to them chapter and verse right now. I think that's very true. But going to yours, reading through several of your books over the last few weeks, I wouldn't say that applies to the vast majority of your poems.
I don't want anybody to say to me, I don't understand your poetry. That would make me sad.
Oh, interesting. Sometimes I have this idea that I read a poem once, I like it, but I'm scratching my head. And I read it again, I'm still scratching my head. I read it again, still scratching my head. And if I've read through it many times and looked through many new vocabulary words in the dictionary, the more I do that, the more times I read it and I'm still scratching my head, but still liking it, the more times I will be able to say, oh, now this is a great poem because I'm doing all those things, because I'm going through all those phases and gymnastics. But I know you probably would disagree.
Well, in my case, I will browse around in a new book of poetry, and when I find something I like, it will be before I understand what it's talking about. It will be because of the sound of the language, because of the music of it, because it's beautiful in one way or another or powerful, before I even start to say, what's this all about? And I write as a critic also. And when I find something I like or something I love, I want to know why. I want to not just like it. I want to be able to say, I like it because of this and this and this and this.
Yes. Yes.
First, I love things and then I try to explain them.
I see. Yes. But the try to explain them part is there, isn't it? It's not, it's that part of your brain is still working at a certain level. You're not going to be completely satisfied with the experience if you're totally scratching your head afterwards and so on.
Right.
Reading through many of your poems, I saw one characteristic that stands out that I think is unmissable, really, for anyone who's reading your poetry. And that's what I would call a quarrel with God. Coming from most of your books, you're steeped in the Bible, in the Hebrew Bible, you're steeped in it, and that's apparent to anyone who reads. And so there is a kind of belief going on there, but it's a very rebellious belief. And I say there's a kind of relief because you do have poems called Prayer and so on. So a casual observer or even someone reading more in depth would say, yeah, there is belief going on here, but there's also a really vigorous quarrel with God. Would you like to say something about that?
Sure. First of all, I was raised to be a disbeliever. Third generation atheist, socialist Jew. Even my grandparents were unbelievers. So that's my official religion. But I'm also a Jew. But most important, I always had a spiritual streak that was important to me. And the poets I liked best were always the religious poets. And they could have been Christian, like John Donne and George Herbert and Gerard Manley Hopkins, who just were very strong and alive for me, and I went for them. Or they could have been spiritual without any church, like William Blake and Walt Whitman. Mm-hmm. And when I read such poets, they always came alive for me and they made me feel more alive. When I first read the Bible, I thought I was going to read it as literature, and I found that I bonded with it. That all those wonderful, tremendous, compelling stories, the men and women in those stories were my mothers and fathers. It was all like a dream of my own that I was waking up to. And the God in the Bible was my God, whether I liked him or not. And sometimes I did, and sometimes I didn't. So I identified, for example, with the story of Jacob wrestling with God, and nobody is winning. And when I realized I was writing from a woman's perspective, from a feminist perspective, it was, well, this God is my God, and I'm going to wrestle with this God and this book and try and wrestle a blessing out of it for me and my kind.
Yes, yes, that comes across very strongly. And speaking of God, you often refer to the Shekhinah in your book. Now, many people might not be familiar with the Shekhinah. You refer to it in not just one book, I should say, but in many. For people who are not familiar with the Shekhinah, tell us about that. And sometimes I think you refer to her in the feminine, she or her. Tell us
Yes.
something about it.
Shekhinah is a Hebrew word meaning dwelling or presence, and it is used in the Bible to refer to the presence of God. We think of God as, transcendent and far away from us, up above. But when God is being represented as present here and now to somebody, then the word for presence is Shekhinah. And over the centuries, because it's a feminine noun, and so is Torah, and so is soul, and so is prayer, gradually the term turned into the figure of a feminine divine in Jewish mysticism. And you can call it mythology, you can call it what you want, but the idea is that at the moment of creation was an explosion. And in that explosion, the God we call God the Father got separated from his feminine self. And we can think of the male God figure as up there, far from us, and the Shekhinah as a female divine, the female half of divinity, and as being down here among us. She is present. She is in everything. She is in every atom. She is inside you. She is inside me. And she also travels with her people wherever they go. So there's a lot of lore about her.
I see. Fascinating.
I think we need her. I think having a God who is purely masculine is a big mistake.
Well, that's very interesting. Well, could I have you then read your prayer to the Shekhinah, also from your latest book, The
Yes.
Holy and Broken Bliss? Prayer to the Shekhinah. She appears several times in that book, sometimes without being directly named. And so here is a prayer to the Shekhinah.
And I have to say, this is written during the COVID years and during the years when our whole society seemed to be sick, which is still the case, I think, but it was very intense at the time, the illness of our whole society. So prayer to the Shekhinah. In my prayers night and day is the hope that you will visit me, which possibly you have been doing all the while inside my skin, producing hymnodies of birth, of lamentation lifted from every mass grave in the world, scratching me, pinching me from inside, calling me an idiot, since I do not know how to reach you by myself in the carapace of this body, struggling like the turtle to move as fast as I can and not get run over crossing the street. You at a distance, beloved, my mother, my daughter, you at a distance, my soul, who remains at a distance. They say you will travel to meet me if I travel to meet you. Pity I am so slow, but am grateful for the handful of past moments you have spoken with me, the fool, who hoped to be counted among the poets, weeping along the path to her own soul.
Thank you. That's a lovely one.
Thank you.
One characteristic I found in your poetry, and I wouldn't say this is a major theme. It may not be a theme at all. It may be just a quirk. But, we hear in Matthew 6:34, therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. But I guess Christians do it, Jews do it, all people have that tendency to worry about the future. And I saw this little characteristic that goes throughout your poetry from beginning to now. So for at least for the last 50 years, that you are talking about something and you are often doing something that therapists say don't do, that rabbis say don't do, that pastors say don't do, that Jesus says don't do. you are kind of fast forwarding about tomorrow. And I think there's a rebelliousness to that, but it always finds some kind of resolve. Even though you're doing it, it's a quirk. Thinking about the future, worrying about the future, planning, see if you can somehow have an advantage by worrying about it or dreading. But then it often resolves itself. So you don't leave totally on that note. You leave on a note. So that dread, that anticipation about future events is a jumping off point to another moment. And you do that, I would say, going back to your latest book, in the poem The Plateau. And you do it there, and it comes at the very end with a hopeful note about married love and rekindled passion. So if you could read that one, The Plateau, it's in the book, The Volcano and After.
And it's called The Plateau. And I have to point out that, yes, I think you have hit on something, Alex, and that is I've written about time since I was a kid. Time keeps coming up. And I'm writing about a long marriage. I think at the time I wrote this poem, I was probably married 50 or 60 years, something like that. The Plateau. The climb was long and often dangerous. There were recriminations, stumblings, and yet never did I desire another for my companion on this path. So at last we have gained the plateau. The delicacy with which we attend to one another's liberty is remarkable. Our demons sleep in their caves like angry children who have sobbed themselves into exhaustion while the grown-ups smile. You praise my writing, my cooking, my kindness. I admire your jokes, your politics, your photographs. And now shall I make a prediction? Someday, one of us will begin to die, to lean on the other with horrible need, and passion will flow again.
Thank you. Well, looking at my clock here, we have a precious few moments left, maybe just about a minute. Do you have any words at all of hope for the next few years, considering the results of the election and the doomsayers? Anything comfort?
One thing to say is that we've been here before and that every society goes through phases. And what's happening here now is happening all over the world. And most likely we will survive it. Many terrible and stupid things will happen, and then we'll swing another way. And I probably won't be here for that. I wish I were. I did not plan to be in my 80s at a time when my whole society and the whole world was falling in love with dictators. But here we are. We can at least be conscious. And if we can write about whatever disaster is going on and write about it accurately and truly, that is a kind of conquest.
Yes, absolutely. I could go on for a long time, but we've reached that time. Thank you, Alicia Ostriker.
Thank you, Alex. It's been a pleasure.
If you would like more information, you can go to Wikipedia or the Poetry Foundation website for more on Alicia's work.
Thank you, Alicia Ostriker, and thank you out there for listening to another edition of Prufrock's House of Poetry. Next up in the series will be an interview with Will Slattery.